Come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up, come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up,
Hi, I'm Richard. Wanted to sit and talk a little bit today about data engineers and curiosity. People that are wanting to level up their data engineering teams, understanding what it takes to get the skills and the curiosity going to get people to the next level is pretty important. I'm coming at this from the perspective of being in this business a little over 30 years, working with every programmer, database, watch the problems of the evolution of the technology systems out there. So it's kind of given it a different perspective. And I want to start off with a little bit of humor. And so basically I like to say I'm a professional screw-up. Now I'm pretty good at not breaking things. But I'm using this humor with a little bit of reality, so let's break this down, because there's a concept here. When you say I'm a professional screw-up, it's another way of saying I learned from my mistakes and do not fear failure. Right? Now I'm pretty good at not breaking things as I constantly improve performance through trial and error. Right? That's important. And at the same point in time, when you're really looking at it, and I learned from your mistakes, do not fear failure, constantly improving through trial and error is simply stated, I'm always curious to find a solution to the problem. And think about that for a moment. That in and of itself isn't easy. It causes problems in many companies due to culture, budgets, time, effort, not enough resources, and all of the aspects that go with part of our corporate worlds. But curiosity is such an important part to not be overlooked, right? Because the biggest challenge with problem solving is obvious to me. In order to successfully solve problems, we must not only seek help to solve the problems, we also have to actively foster an environment to instill the curiosity in others, right? That leads to the obvious question, how do we instill curiosity in others? To look at that, you have to understand what is curiosity, right? Curiosity is not something you can teach people. It's not something you can force into people. But if, cognitive research and study really illustrates curiosity is innate in all humans. The 3-year-old's always going to pick up something and probably put it in their mouth. That's a curiosity thing that we grow, right? It acts as a filter you put over the world to help your mind decide what information to look at. And it's something we all have, and the people who have stopped being curious, in my opinion, is a defense mechanism to fight corporate culture. It's something we all have the power to fix, and we need to do together, right? But we absolutely can do these things for our team. Fostering that environment for curiosity, encourage it, right? And the one big way to do that is to reward curiosity, making sure your team knows and appreciates the trying. Make curiosity easy, part of the culture, whether that's a team, an entire department, or an entire company, right? You've got to make that curiosity easy to do. Another thing is simple questions as leaders and business people and team leads is don't tell people what you're trying to do. Ask them what you're hoping to understand. Who wants to explore it, right? Help your team by providing tooling for them to be curious. Some of my favorite things to happen is when one of my team members says something like, I think you're wrong, but I can't prove it yet. Can I dig into it and see? God, I love that question, right? Or when they say, I'm not sure you're right on that. Because my response is not to be defensive. My response is, prove it. Let's go look into that. It makes a point, even when I know I'm right, I make a point to let them dig into it anyway. Oftentimes they'll find something I haven't thought of, or they're going to learn the new way to solve the next problem. Right? When you're doing all those things, you can watch the benefits start coming from curiosity over time, right? So here's a few tips, and I'm not going to read every one of these. You can see it on the screen. Take a screenshot. Enjoy it. Some of these may spawn some questions. Put them in the chat that's going on, because we're going to do a little Q&A in a bit. We'll answer some of those questions on what it takes to instill curiosity. But some of the points are this. Giving data engineers the freedom to explore data sources. That also means make it easy for them. Right? Make it accessible to them. Encourage them to ask questions. I love the questions that we throw away during sprint planning or during backlog grooming or when we're talking about a problem because they're asking the questions. And you have to build that culture to not let them be discouraged by that, right? Giving those data engineers the autonomy to make decisions and take ownership of their work, super important. And give these people the tools for training, mentorship programs, pair a senior data scientist up with a junior data scientist when they've solved the problem and talk about the things they failed at to get there, right? Get the data engineers to work together and between teams and across departments even, help them understand what you're trying to do while you're solving it, right? Always keeping learning is super, super important, right? That communication, the training, and learning, huge steps. A few more things we can talk about, because these are all big, huge things to, and additionally build incredible teams to talk about data, to build into the patterns, to help grow to the next level and get farther on, right? Other how-tos, interactive visualizations. There's a lot of companies that really just look at a data set in Excel or do simple visualizations. Get interactive visualizations to let them explore the data and let the people you're giving to further explore the data and the insights it found. Encourage the experimentation, right? There's a lot of ways to do this, and I'll mention a couple points later. But big things like maybe you're putting 4 hours into a 2-week sprint to just explore a problem. Right? Maybe it's do a half a sprint every other month to just let that team explore, encourage it, right? And that experimentation has so much power in what we're doing. Make it a point as team leaders, and paired partners and senior leaders to reward failures as much as successes. We all love to tout the fact that we solved the problem. What we're not doing is touting the fact that we failed 26 times to get there. All of those are important. Bring all of that into part of those reward systems, because if it wasn't for the failures, you wouldn't have the successes. So, talking about tooling. The world has evolved a lot in the last 30 years with data. The growth of data is obscene. You've heard that from a number of other speakers. We're all seeing it in our, cloud hosting bills and the amount of servers we have to bring. But one of my favorite tools to make that easier is Starburst. And we're obviously at Data Nova because I'm a huge fan. But there's a ton of other tools, even some simple ones, Spark and Python, getting things to build better abstraction layers to get access to the data, more connections, right? Build plugins for Starburst that now wrap APIs, so you're left joining off a weather API somewhere. And the developers, the data analysts don't have to go write new code, right? Another one that's a lot of fun when we start talking about encouraging explorations is something called scrollytelling. If it's something you've never heard of, go look it up. It's actually a great way to tell stories and look at data and let it understand it. Getting into more Power, BI, Tableau, all of the type of tools that exist for BI connections and connect right into the data sets to analyze. We were an early consumer of data products built into Starburst. Fantastic tool to build my analysis and then understand if it's being used and surface it up to all of the tools so the analysts get it much faster. Understand mapping tools if you're doing things with GIS. We do a lot with lat long. So understand how to go look at it in a superset and tie it into the data sets are real important. For some of the larger companies, don't neglect open source tooling. Right? Find a way to build that in and allow that curiosity to happen, because there's some great tools that turn into, fantastic enterprise tools later. Starburst is a great example, coming with its sources in Trino and then moving into the open source tooling and getting into the corporate world and the enterprise, systems. And obviously the SaaS products like Galaxy or, there's a number of them out there that will help build you those interfaces built on top of open source. So don't neglect it. The other thing that's real important to build curiosity is get it outside of data engineering, right? And that means build or buy more self-service tooling. Make it easy for the other consumers of that data to get to it. There's still a lot of things out there I see in a lot of companies where the only way they can do this is submit a request in through a ticket, right, ServiceNow or Jira or something, and get a data set that gets surfaced as a CSV and someone looks at it. They don't even know what fields are available. And those self-service tooling is going to be major for helping get the next generation of that curiosity and build a lot of tooling there. Starburst is great because it makes it easy to abstract a bunch of things and put the tools in the right people. And I'm not a sales guy. I'm not here to sell you on Starburst. Most of you are obviously familiar with it if you're here at Data Nova. But understanding the ability to get, to me, the important one in all of the things I've seen is the list at the bottom. How do I build abstraction layers into that? Right? That analytics engine gives the ability to control what you need and not be a heavy lift, and that's important. So how do I know all this works? Let me tell you a little bit about what we do at El Toro and how curiosity has helped us. I'll give you a great story. So at El Toro, we work in the advertising industry and a lot of data analytics. We built systems that consume a little over 4 million transactions per second at real-time speeds, dropping it out to the data warehouse, consuming it into data lakes, and connecting it in to do our analysis and processing. Things like matching IP addresses to homes across the country. The scale we have to go through is crazy. We've had to build entirely new systems that were out there that we originally wrote in C because, bluntly, we didn't know how to do it. We figured it out, and then we got to the point that wasn't fast enough. We've rewritten a lot in Rust code. Right? One of my engineers came to me and said, "Hey, Rich, I think there's a better way than what we're doing." I'm like, I don't know, we're written in C. It's about as low level as you can. It's memory mapped allocations. He's like, I think I can do it in Rust. So I gave him a sprint to just explore it. And he came back, he's like, all right, I got a prototype working. It's not near production. It's going to take us a couple months to get there, but I know it'll work now. And he could prove it to us. So we literally went from having 500 servers down to 80 servers to do the exact same thing by converting to Rust code. It's literally him going, I think there's a better way. I want to dig into it. You know, we had problems with Spark. We spin up huge Spark clusters, right? And Spark's an amazing tool for doing large-scale data processing. But we had a problem of 1,000 servers a week was killing my cloud bill. So he literally rewrote the engine in Rust, built on top of it. So now we're, with 10% of the resources we were doing in Spark, we're now doing 1 billion records a second, you know, to do data loads and batch jobs that are crazy kind of economy of scale, literally because we did the culture for the curiosity, and he went, I think there's a better way. I read an article about a thing. You know, a kind of a fun example that's more recent out there is one of my engineers was like, hey, ChatGPT is great. I acknowledge it's great. There's some reviews. I helped fill out the words in ChatGPT and did a lot of fun stuff. But so they started looking into these SQL engines that are now built onto GPT. So using natural language now, some of our seniors and other teams can literally go, hey, I'd like to know how many customers were in the past 2 months that had an order over $10,000, and I'd like to group it by region. And then he ran that into a GPT engine. It output a SQL query. We pasted it into our Starburst interface, and it literally built it for us. Like, that's cool. The power of AI is making it more easy for the people who don't know what SQL is, SQL query language, for those of you who are on the call, letting AI go help overcome those hurdles. We're going to explore it. Well, I know that some GPT thing is going to work to production. No. But the curiosity is there, and they keep trying to find new ways. I'll still take out my team for lunch and encourage them to go down that road, because the power of that curiosity has given us amazing ways to do it. You know, we've built dozens and dozens of patents and technology, and our business has grown over the years from the amount of data we have. And even though we started in advertising, it moved to analytics, right? And as you move into analytics and you've got a 9 petabyte data warehouse, you've got to learn how to start asking better questions. Right? And that's kind of the power of the curiosity, is I want them to look at it. I want them to do it. You know, as a 10-year-old company, we fully understand curiosity doesn't grow overnight. It takes a while to build the right people and the right way to go do it. So I highly recommend you get more curious people in your team, because they're all curious unless you've discouraged them, or somewhere in the world they've become discouraged. Right? Curious people work better with a team leader, ideally an executive support for that exploration. And if that means you're giving them a couple hours a sprint, if you're giving them a week a month, whatever it is, give them some problems and let them explore. Let them be curious for that data, right? Let the data answer or lead to the answer, because that is always better than making the data match the desired outcome. That really quells some curiosity when you're like, find me the data that proves this. No, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Go out and explore and see what that tells you. Hopefully those two lines up. Why is the best answer and question to an outcome. When you get a result and someone goes, why is that? That is the definition of curiosity. Understand that. Let your people understand that and support it. One challenge a lot of leaders and team leads and even senior executives have is understanding how much time and cost goes in when you're already resource constrained, you don't have enough people to solve the problems, or you're worried people are going to abuse the time. So you want to build boundaries for the exploration. A lot of us are in sprint-like environments. Let that sprint be part of your boundary. Let engineers explore, and your boundaries will prevent time abuse. However, If they can justify exploration, don't let the boundary be a stop sign. Just a check-in point to the next step. You know, when they've gone too far down the rabbit hole, you've spent too much effort on it on sprints and you've got other things, it doesn't mean they should stop, but maybe we need to cut back the time, right? Change it from a whole sprint to a day in the next sprint. So it's not dead until you can prove it can't be justified, right? When the time can be justified to explore to solve a unique problem, the curiosity will pay dividends. Now, I know a bunch of you have questions, and I think Monica is going to come up and help us answer or ask a bunch of questions and talk about it, because I really want you guys to get some different real-world perspectives on what it takes to put curiosity into some of these systems. So, Monica, how are you doing?
I'm good, Rich.
Great.
Thank you so much for being here. Hello, everyone. I'm Monica. I'm a developer advocate here at Starburst, and I thought we should put Rich in the hot seat for some of these questions. So here we are. We're going to get started. If you have any questions for him about his topics, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll get those questions answered for you, well, to the best of our ability. So let's get started here. The first thing I want to ask you is, obviously this is great, and your engineers are amazing, but at what limit do you have for them? Because you were talking about building those boundaries, right? There's got to be some place where you have a decision of when you need to kind of cut them off. How do you do that? And at what, is it a time thing?
Sure. The reality is, when do you know when to cut off a developer from spending too much time in being curious and actually understanding what is there? The reality is, I kind of mentioned it a little bit ago, that's about bringing the sprint structure and building that curiosity, obviously, into your leaders and stuff as well. If you build that time effort, even when I know they're wrong, I want them to explore. I want them to spend some time on it. But I don't want them to waste the next 6 sprints because, bluntly, we don't have that much time. But so we allocate some time. If it's an exploration, I might give them a day that sprint to go explore it. And then if we've spent a sprint or two of a little bit of effort, then that's kind of the check-in point. My boundary at the sprint level is the check-in point. Let's check in. And because we checked in, that's where I get to say, okay, I think we're on the wrong track because, and if they can't justify the continued research, we can cut it off. If they can justify it or have a real question, I'm remiss not to let them try, because I very well could be wrong.
Adding the guardrails.
The guardrails.
Perfect.
Exactly.
Yes. So some organizations have hackathons that they do one every 6 months. They have like 3 days. They have everyone they add and bring in, work on something. What are your opinions on that, and how do you make something successful? Because my fear is that if you do only, a 4-hour hackathon, how are you really getting anywhere?
That's correct. So in a lot of companies, I believe hackathons need to be more than a single event.
Okay.
You might spend 4 hours and do a hackathon in an afternoon, right? That doesn't mean that's the end. That was phase 1. And then, the next month, there's another 4-hour block that is expanding on it. I definitely make them optional, but encourage the people that I know need to be more curious. And oftentimes, it'll be things like, let's play with Arduinos. Let's just explore with something outside the boundaries and help change their mind. Get out of the rut they might be in by doing something different. So hackathons are a great way to build innovation. There's a lot of companies that innovation's hard for their culture. So use it as a training method. So it kind of falls under training, because when you talk about it and you analyze the failure of why that hackathon thing didn't work, that's the most important 45 minutes of the whole thing, right? Earlier on, doing it is giving the option to explore, but when you realize what failed, that's what I want out of the hackathon. It's not that something is necessarily going to innovate, although if it does, fantastic. It's really about understanding why it didn't work and talking about the path. So hackathons to me is more of a training than an innovation, although it falls under both, depending on what you're doing with it and how much effort on it.
So it's getting them in that mindset to be curious. It's a tool that can be used for that purposes.
It's absolutely a tool.
Yes.
Absolutely a tool.
One question we have from the chat is, what role does psychological safety have in supporting the curiosity of your engineers?
So that one actually is a great question. So the psychological safety, and I believe I understand the intent of what you're asking here, is really about the leadership. The leadership team, your team lead, your VP, your CTO, CIO, CDO, that entire organization, there's a concern we've built in corporate America that failure is bad, right? So all the people need to understand it's good. I honestly, if you have a hard time in this environment, set up a failure for somebody and don't berate them, right? Reward them for that failure. Let others see it. The ones that have been kind of overly beat down too long in that structure really just need to see it's okay. And then you get them out of their shell. And then you reward them for failing or succeeding, and then they want to do it again. So it is a super important thing to build that culture, because that's really, to me, a culture question, right? How do you combat the culture of the failures to get that psychological safety in supporting the curiosity?
Yes, yes. So our next question is, how do you keep multiple developers from going down the same curiosity path? I'm assuming that's something about, looking at each developer and knowing what they're doing, or do you let them both go down the same curiosity
Depends
path?
on the problem and the team.
Sure.
If they're on two different teams, then I've got awareness of it from PMs and doing sprints of sprints and getting awareness of what's being worked on. If they're on the same team, I want them to pair up. Maybe not at the same time. You're going to work on it this sprint, you're going to come after it, or we're going to pair program through some of these problems. If they're on totally different teams and they're both having the same curiosity problem, my answer is let them work together. Right? Cross that team boundary, get out of that isolated, I'm stuck in my lane problem, and let them look at it. If they're truly on the same path and it's obvious they're going to have the same solution, it makes sense to dissuade one of them, get them both at a table and say, hey, you guys are both on the same path, let's talk about it, because we only have enough resources to let one of you look at it. I'll let you guys fight it out. And they'll literally go, oh, that's going to be a better, one of them will say, that's a better way, I'd rather they do it. Or they're better at this problem, we'll have them look at it, I'll check it later. So it gives a boundary that helps it actually.
Well, and then also having probably the psychological safety that everyone can work together and
Exactly.
you have that
Part
culture.
of that culture build,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep. Okay, so our next question, how do you foster this culture in other departments that are not data literate? For example, marketing, HR, other things like that.
So I mentioned it earlier, things like scrollytelling, getting better at the visualizations, getting better at the patterns, giving a way for them to explore the data in a no-code way, even if that's a scrollytell or a PowerPoint and you make 20 extra slides that have some extra descriptions. The way to foster it in non-data rebel departments is about giving them a way to play. Right? And that might mean the data engineers have to do a little extra and put it in Excel and build 12 visualizations for them. Right? Start them down the right road. Oftentimes it means a data engineer should get paired with someone from that department. Again, working on team communication, working on collaboration, but more importantly, get them to get their fingers in the data without being, a programmer, without being a data engineer and understanding what SQL is. So the only way to really foster that is make your team curious, let the other departments watch the rewards of failure and success, and bring some of those people along.
Right.
And then scrollytelling and data visualization aspects is probably the easiest way to start encouraging that in others.
Yeah. I think that's a fair trade-off. You
It
build
is.
a couple of Excel spreadsheets, but then they have much more knowledgeable questions,
Right.
as opposed to just kind of throwing something over the fence they don't know what to send to
Exactly.
you.
A lot of our PMs and Scrum Masters will also follow up a week later with them and say, do you have any questions?
Oh, cool.
So we helped encourage those leaders to follow up and see if there was something else before they close that issue out, forget about it. Again, that's just a culture build you got to work on.
Right, right. Okay, so I think our next question has to do more of, in those environments, I think sometimes how do you get the business on board? Because a lot of times your side, this is a little bit of a redundant, the data literacy side is all about failure. You can build that culture there, but how do you justify that to the business when you're spending their dollars on their sprints and all of that?
So that is a harder question, and the answer kind of varies a whole lot depending on what level you are in the organization. Sure. Okay, so I'm going to kind of talk just one point therein. How do you get the business to buy in when a senior leader or someone at the higher end is more on productivity and doesn't care about the exploration, solve the problem, and move on? The answer is at the team level. At the director or VP level, if you're bought into the idea that curiosity will benefit you long term, to some point you have to shield some of your team. Go let it explore. Build the time for it and force it. And when you get some of those wins, highlight not only the wins. Hey, we thought of exploring this. We found 26 ways it didn't work. But look, this 27th way did it, right? We figured out how to make it work. And they kind of have to be an advocate. If that's hard in your organizational structure, then I still say, even at the team lead level on a sprint team of 6, that doesn't mean your team doesn't have the culture, because the exploration ends up leading to a velocity increase over time. So the reality is, I only have to keep that up for so long till we're learning it. So it's, every level needs it, and the reality is touting failure and success and getting the culture and the rewards when they start coming, prove the payoff.
Exactly. You get it once, you see the payoff in the future, you can move forward from there. Okay, so another question we have is, how do you manage the balance of data controls, security, governance, et cetera, with the experimentation that you're doing on your teams?
Ooh, very good question. It's a little hard in some industries, and I understand that. And the reality is, even those industries, though, there are still people that have access to the data. And so the visualization oftentimes is the way to do it. If I can't do it as a self-service because the other team has compliance problems or data controls getting in, then we've got to get better at visualizing data back for them. Give them ways to find new questions, right? And the questions lead to me being able to experiment to answer the question. So if it's a requirement in governance and controls that only certain people have access to it, the reality is then more visualizations need to exist to get other people to have curiosity to come back to you. So that's kind of the only answer I can give you without, obviously military is a little bit different than, you know, advertising that's different than healthcare. So there's some nuance there, but visualization when you can explore the data, building sandboxes in isolated ways where data can't get out of it, you know, which there's a lot of big tools that you can build sandboxes for it. So I recommend any of those to help do that is the way to do it. That's self-service tooling and visualization. So
we've talked a lot about kind of the innovation side of this, but how has this paid off in production for you guys?
Sure. I think you're kind of meaning toward how does it help with production outages and how does it prevent with root cause analysis. So the curiosity, oftentimes, when you're using the curiosity to build more complex things, it also means that people have a better understanding most of the time, even though sometimes developers and programmers suck. There's better documentation behind it. And when something has a problem and there's an outage, they naturally have more knowledge to go try and solve the problem. And as you've trained that curiosity, it's also had a major effect on being able to get to root cause. Because when you don't know what broke it, curious people will go figure out what broke it, not just band-aid it to answer the question. Or when they do, because you have to get back online, there's an item in their sprint planning, you know, that they've got a ticket out there to go dig in and find root cause later. So the curiosity's built the culture around really being able to understand that, solve both production issues, and most of the time, build better code, right? Build better data paths so that they don't have production issues because of that curiosity.
Okay, thank you so much, Rich, for your time. We really appreciate you being here, and I think this was so beneficial for us today in the chat.
Well, I'm glad. If there's other people who have questions, feel free to, you know, put them in, friend us on LinkedIn, ask around, or more importantly, go experiment a little and cultivate some curiosity. Have a great day.